Buried amongst the junk sleeps the Quadzilla. Now, it hasn't been easy, but we've slowly been excavating this thing out of here. And we're slowly getting there. One step closer to getting it free and then seeing what's, broken on it while it's been sitting here. Wow. She definitely looks a little bit neglected. Tires are going flat. Believe it or not, the 250R's been out a lot more than that thing has been. In fact, in the time that I've actually technically owned this Zilla, I've never ran it. Bought it, literally rolled it in here, and there it's been ever since. You can definitely say it's kind of born fresh. It's got a lot of dirt on it. It's amazing how tightly this thing was shoved in here. It's like playing Tetris. Everything was just kind of interwoven in here. This has not been a fun one. Well, it's nice that the brakes are seized up too. So, it'd be too easy to roll this thing out of here. I'm telling you, these dollies here, they should be factory for towing these around. See, now this is great. I've had this project sitting around for so long that when I pulled it into the garage, it felt like I had a brand new project. I'm like, oh man, sweet. Gonna get the Quadzilla running. It's like a new quad to me. So, you just don't get that when you don't keep junk laying around for decades at a time. I mean, this goes back to the whole, it's like every day is Christmas when you find stuff you forgot you had. It's been a while. It's got to be at least 8 years, if not, 9 or 10. I can't remember if it wasn't in running condition when I bought it or what, but I literally rolled it into the barn, and it has been there ever since. I mean, I kind of remember why this thing was parked. It brakes just by sitting there. Of course, none of the brakes work. The tires are flat, but that's to be expected. We'll find what else is broken on this thing by just sitting in storage. Now, the whole reason I actually want to get this thing running again is take it to some grass drag races. I figure this would be a good excuse to actually get it out and use it. And it also helps that I was cleaning out the barn at the same time anyways, so we actually had access to it. Now, while it's been in storage, I've always kicked it over just to keep the internal parts moving and freed up. Actually, the more I keep looking at this, I forgot how many parts were missing off of it. I mean, brackets are overrated. It's been sitting there long enough that the grips are kind of starting to biodegrade. Well, I guess we gotta start taking things apart and take stock of what we got. But have no fear, I think we'll have it running again. Well, we've got minimal mouse nest storage in there, which is good. However, it was easy to access because there's no airbox cover. Need some bolts on that. Actually, we need bolts everywhere. This must have been the lightweight racing kit. Well, the lack of fasteners is definitely making disassembly quick. I mean, I don't know if this thing was just held together with faith or maybe all the fasteners rattled loose. See, this is just an example of how, compared to like maybe a Honda, this thing is just overcomplicated and unreliable. There's a cable and like a spring and a hook pawl system here to release the seat when it comes off. Well, of course you pulled this here and it's sticking and it's not working. Whereas the Honda is just like a lever with a spring on it that catches a hook. So I'm going to douse this in oil. Now, I'd say the first plan of action is we're going to top off any of the fluids that are low, which I'm assuming is everything, and wait and see if we have any fluids leaking out onto the floor. The front brakes don't work. The rear brakes are out of fluid. I like that zip tie mounting system on there. Radiator was low. Ooh. Petrified stink bug. I kind of hope there was no gas left in here. That's going to be nasty. That's kind of nasty. Well, we're going to pull that tank and, wash it out with a little bit of fuel just to be safe. There it is. I knew we had to have at least one mouse nest in there. .4 brake fluid? What? Well, don't tell nobody. Well, it ain't the worst I've seen, but it ain't good. So we checked the case oil, and there's some oil in there. And I know this thing had a clutch put in it not too long ago, so that oil's got to be good for at least another few years. So we sort of have brakes up front now. I mean, some's better than nothing. Rear brakes are working, so that's a plus. We've got minimal leakage draining onto the floor. Time to start hitting all the cables and pivot points with some oil. Like this clutch is, like you can push the quad back almost, and it doesn't even go in. Well, apparently you shouldn't mount the clutch cable onto the exhaust. They tend to melt. I can't take these grips. Well, some good news is the front tires seem to hold some air. Bad news is the valve stems don't appear to be doing so well. Maybe we'll get a little bit of duct tape on that. It's kind of funny how I ended up with this thing. It was never really my intention to ever go out and find a Quadzilla. It sort of found me. And one of the cool things that I've really kind of appreciated about it is one of the same things that a lot of the other machines I pick up and sort of accumulate. They have a cool history behind them. I generally prefer three-wheelers to the four-wheeled variety, but we made an exception for 500 two-stroke power. The Quadzilla is sort of like the Thundercats and stuff. The ultimate, highest displacement for that era. It was kind of the overkill, weapon of choice. That's the kind of thing too, when you're growing up looking at stuff in magazines, you always want the biggest of everything, the baddest, so that's why you always go with the highest displacement. I mean, more is better, right? So this was never really like my dream quad though, because I was more into snowmobiles and stuff back then. However, after kind of being in the sport a little bit, seeing the reputation that these had, that's kind of what really drew me towards it. Well, that and the fact that this thing was owned by a friend of mine, and I did a lot of the maintenance on it, rebuilding the engine, among other things on it. So after you work on it enough, you kind of feel a little bit that you're a part of it. And, instead of seeing it get sold off, what do? You buy it. And if you haven't noticed, I have a habit of buying stuff. This thing was one of those rare purchases I've made where I was actually quite content just letting it sit there. It was kind of neat having a piece of, history, if you could call it that, just sitting around waiting for the time you could bring it back and use it. And maybe because I just like defending the hoarding/collecting hobby, but again, this is one of those things that's been sitting around for so long, haven't done anything with it. Most people would say, get rid of it, you're never going to use it. Well, guess what? We're using it. So you can tell the man to shove it. And you never know. Someday I might try to fix this thing up, even, nice by my standards. It could certainly use a nice set of shocks, and really go through the whole chassis, replace any bushings that are loose and bearings and stuff. I mean, the motor's fairly fresh, but being that it is what it is, I'm sure it'll probably blow itself apart here shortly, and I'll be digging into it. One of the best things I saw lately while out riding my three-wheeler, seen a couple of guys pull in, after they were done riding, and one of them was on an LT500R, and the other was on a 250R four-wheeler. And they were both wearing authentic vintage 80s gear. It was amazing. I was so jealous I wasn't that old school. So we're going to take the carburetor apart for good measure, because, you should just do that. Now, if my memory serves me right, I think this was extra rich when it was running before, so I have a feeling we're going to be adjusting some stuff here to get it to really run right and get it kind of dialed in. You could see on the spark plug when I pulled it before that it was pretty black. I'm kind of surprised that there was actually some tar gas left in there. It had a little bit of grunge, but nothing out of the ordinary. So we tweaked the jetting a little bit and we'll see how she rolls. So it's funny how you go back and double check things years later. All this time I had assumed that this was just a regular 38mm Mikuni flat slide carburetor that was on the Zilla. I mean, that's what it came with it. So I'm putting it back together and I'm kind of looking inside the bore. Looks like kind of a rough finish on that inside bore there. So sure enough, we threw a set of calipers on it. This thing's been bored out to 40mm. Wasn't expecting that. Now that's kind of throwing me for a loop, because usually when you bore out the carbs like this, you got to go up a few sizes in the jets because it's, a larger area. The vacuum signal isn't as strong, so you got to increase the jet size. This had a 400 jet in it, and the thing always seemed pig rich before, so we put it down to a 390. I mean, nothing crazy difference, and we're gonna see how it runs now. But I wouldn't have expected that for a bored out carburetor. I gotta say though, those are the best performance upgrades, the ones that you didn't even know about. Now, one of the frustrating things of having so many parts, I actually remember that bracket that holds the motor there is sitting somewhere, because I found it like years later, realized what it was, thought that I would put it somewhere where I would remember it, and apparently failed at that. So now we get to play scavenger hunt for that, which will probably never show up, and I'll probably end up having to make a part to fit into that, and I'll probably not make that part and just leave it as it is. I'm actually surprised at how much corrosion there is on the underside here. I mean, it wasn't like this thing was ever sitting outside, and you got a lot of gravel inside the storage barn there, so just goes to show that it's always good to keep stuff moving. Well, we hammered the brakes free and got a couple of new valve stems installed in the tires. Gotta love jobs that you can fix with a hammer. So after airing up the tires, and we checked for spark, it's got that. Heck, we're ready to clean out that fuel tank and put some gas to it. Alright, we're going to put some gas to this thing. Yeah, that kind of needs fixed. Shouldn't have to use pliers on that. Should put riding boots on for this. That might help if I put the spark plug wire on. Let's try that again. Well, this is what you get for trying to fix stuff the right way. We had marginal front brakes, which is better than nothing. Decided to clean that milkshake out of there, bleed some new fluid into it. Sure enough, in the process, the right front caliper quit working. It's like it's built up pressure. I think one of the lines has collapsed. So that's great. Well, there it is, all back together. We're still missing a few bolts, but we got more in it now than it had before. I mean, zip ties count as bolts too, right? So of course we ordered the cheapest grips you could get on Amazon, which just happened to be blue. And it turns out they're for a dirt bike, because the right side's made for a twist throttle, not a thumb throttle. So we just slung some good old friction tape on there and called it a day. Well, the Zilla made it 5 minutes before braking. The old Kickstarter spring gave up the dust, and it's grinding on the inside, so we're not going to race it and break it. Park it and forget it for a while. So here sits the Quadzilla again, broken. I mean, we almost got it fully functional. So winter is quickly approaching, and not sure if I'm going to have time to screw with this now or set it back in the barn and work on it another day. I'm sure I'll get to it soon. Definitely won't put it off and let it sit for a while.